Today we're going to be talking about Parts Shop Max lower control arms, some more advanced concepts when it comes to these lower control arms, and we're going to brush on a few other things when it comes to the rear suspension. So the first thing I want to talk about, and this actually goes for all fasteners in general, is something called minimum thread engagement. And what that means is the amount of threads that you have engaged into the fastener, this length should be equal to the diameter of the fastener in order for it to work the way that it's intended to and for it to retain the maximum strength. Another big thing you can apply this principle to is actually lug nuts. So some people like to run the slip-on spacers, but if you do run the slip-on spacers, you're blocking some of the threads that you're able to use when you put the lug nuts on. So since this stud is 12 millimeters long, you would still need about 12 millimeters of threads engaged into the lug nut in order for it to work properly and be as safe as it's designed to be. So with that being said, the thickest slip-on spacer that you could probably run and still have a safe amount of threads would probably be 5 millimeters. If you wanted to run a spacer that's thicker than that, that's slip-on, then you would have to swap these out for extended studs. So this large rod is approximately 1 inch in diameter, so you would actually want at least 1 inch inside the lower control arm for it to retain its strength. The rod is 2 inches long, so you would have about an inch sticking out, an inch inside. And then this smaller rod here is, I would say, 5/8, 3/4. So with the 3/4 of an inch, you would want at least 3/4 engaged into the rod in order for it to not pull out. You don't want to thread these in and have this hanging in by freaking 2 threads, and then it's just going to rip out. So that's why minimum thread engagement is so important. So remember, if you're only running lower control arms on your car, you can push the maximum camber out to maybe -10 or so. Even that would be pushing it. And once you start to go further than that, the axle is going to start popping out. So only once you have upper control arms installed to kind of move the hub assembly inwards and hold that axle in, that's when you can go and start extending this even further than you normally would be able to do if you just had the OEM upper control arms. So the next thing I want to talk about is the fact that this rod end, the thinner rod of the two, is actually 1 inch longer than the shorter rod. So we have a 3-inch rod here and a 2-inch rod here. So what that means is this rod can actually extend and hold further out than this rod will. So if you already know that you're going to be extending these LCAs to a large degree, what you're going to be doing is actually extending this out further and then extending this out to about an inch, which is its maximum. But this one is able to go further, and that's the bottom line. Now, if you intend to hyperextend this smaller rod, what you should do is pick up this reinforcement sleeve nut, which not too many people know about. These sleeve nuts, you can buy the pair for about $30 from the Parts Shop Max website. And these actually thread on. They replace this jam nut, so now this becomes the jam nut, and this reinforces the rod. Since you have this skinny rod sticking out, although it has the minimum thread engagement, you know it's not going to pull outwards, but it experiences a lot of lateral force from the car and the suspension system. So I've actually seen people snap this rod from having too much force on it from it being extended so far. So once you install this reinforcement sleeve nut on here, that is going to strengthen this stud that you have hyperextended, and therefore that's never going to break. Now once you have that reinforcement sleeve nut installed, the primary means of adjusting this lower control arm becomes just from using the large rod receiver. So what you would have to do is, if this was on the car, you would have to unbolt this from the car so that you can take this and spin the entire assembly outwards. And you're not going to be able to use the turnbuckle style system as the primary means of adjusting it anymore. To get everything set up, this will allow for fine adjustments. So if you're on the alignment rack and you need to do a few turns in or out, this will allow you to still do that, but it's not going to be the primary means, because if you unthread it too far, you're already close to the minimum thread engagement for this rod. So that's why you won't have that maximum adjustment. The adjustment will be limited. And this is what the lower control arm will look like when it's completely maxed out. So we don't have our reinforcement sleeve nut on this one, we have it here. So we're just showing that same distance there. But this is about the maximum you should be able to unthread this large rod receiver and still keep it safe. And once you combine this sort of extension on the LCA along with the upper control arm, then you can easily get into like negative 20 degrees of camber and or more. The main thing is that just doing this on the lower control arm with the OEM uppers is not going to work out because your axle is going to pop out. So do the upper control arms first, and then you can throw the lower control arms on and start to go a little bit more crazy. But that's the bottom line. And the last thing I just want to say for all my bagged viewers is that when it comes to installing the control arms on your car, what you should do is retain the OEM lower control arm for as long as possible, and only do the uppers to dial in the fitment as you need. Only once you have the uppers maxed out and you want to go super crazy is when you should be swapping out the lower control arms, because you guys are able to do almost everything you need to do only via the upper. Although these are the best lower control arms for guys that are on coilovers because they have this built-in drop, this built-in drop is going to mess up the guys that are on air because the ride height's not going to be evened out. So yeah, just retain your OEM LCAs, get the upper, and then once you want more camber, then you'll have to go for a straight design LCA that doesn't have this built-in drop.